Welcome to Face to Face with me, Lauren Booth. In this programme we meet senior political figures and delve into the pressing issues of the day across the globe. My guest today is Baroness Jenny Tonge. Baroness Tonge has been a senior politician with the Liberal Democrat Party in the United Kingdom since 1997, often courting controversy for her views on the state of Israel. Baroness Jenny Tonge to Face to Face. In 2003 you made your first trip to Palestine. After that you began to be highly critical of Israel's behaviour in Palestine. What did you see to shape your views?
Well, it's very interesting really, because that visit in 2003 was not just interesting, it was a life-changing experience. I mean, my life has never been the same since. Before that I'd made speeches as international development spokesman on poverty and deprivation, and I'd sometimes mention the West Bank and Gaza. But our party line was very balanced, a balanced view. You know, there is good and bad on both sides, and we must keep a balanced view. I went out there to see for myself with Una King, who everyone remembers. And the one word that sums that visit up for me is humiliation. At every point in the West Bank, I saw people being humiliated, struggling to live a normal life, struggling to be cheerful about things, but being humiliated once, twice, 3 times a day by Israeli soldiers, by the restrictions on their lives, by the way they couldn't get their goods out easily, and it was just humiliation. Can I tell you one story that will illustrate it? Yes, we saw people pushed around at checkpoints and kept waiting for hours. In fact, we were kept waiting most of a day at the Eretz crossing, and the British consul had to come and rescue us in the end to take us back to Jerusalem. But there was one incident that summed it up for me, the humiliation. Our cab driver was asked to produce his papers at the checkpoint, which he duly did, very patient. The soldier doing the checking took the papers away, and we all sat in the car for the usual, you know, half an hour, 3/4 of an hour. I mean, nobody knows where the papers had gone. When he eventually came back, he said, "Okay," and shoved them at the driver. And as he shoved them, and I was in the back seat of the car behind him, I saw exactly what happened. He dropped them outside the car. So he, you know, deliberately made it difficult. So our driver, very patient, smiling man, gets out of the car and starts, it was a bit windy, starts catching his papers down on his hands and knees, picking up precious, precious ID papers. And as he did so, the guy got into a Jeep and very nearly drove over his hands. Now, I really found that terribly shocking. It was something that just summed up the Israeli attitude to the Palestinians. Make them crawl, make them suffer, humiliate whenever you can, in this really nasty, insidious way. And we saw that time and time again during that week. We were also there when an attempted assassination of Dr. Rantisi occurred, and a helicopter gunship came into the centre of Gaza City and fired at the car they thought he was in. He actually escaped at that time. And he is a very well-respected doctor, as well as being a Hamas member. We saw the carnage and the collateral damage that was done then, and the people that were injured. And it just made me so angry that the Israelis, having been given this wonderful opportunity of some land of their own, after the early years couldn't have made it really, really good for everyone living in that area. Why didn't they see? I think in the Balfour Declaration even, it said you must do no harm to the people who live there at the moment. In other words, it was never envisaged in the Balfour Declaration that people would be driven at gunpoint out of their homes and houses would be flat.
In 2004, you made a controversial statement. You said that if you had grown up in Palestine and you were under constant humiliation, you would understand being a suicide bomber. The media then called for your leadership to remove you from your post. What happened?
Well, I made that statement at a meeting to try and express just how I felt, because the constant humiliation that's gone on for decades in Palestine, even after a week, I was feeling depressed and angry and humiliated myself. And I felt if I was in that situation, trying to bring up my family, and that happened every day as I was struggling to make a living and struggling to make the children feel good about themselves and good about their future, I might, if I'd been a Palestinian and if I'd been a Muslim, which of course I'm neither of those things, have considered being one myself, actually. I think that's what I...
So what's the difference between saying you understand the impulse of the suicide bomber and encouraging terrorism on the Jewish populace?
I had any intention whatsoever to promote acts of terror. I just said I could understand where people were coming from. And it is absolutely useless condemning acts of terrorism, like called suicide bombing, without actually going to the very roots and understanding why they do it, because they're not going to stop doing it unless you understand the reasons. And I, as a doctor, am very used to putting myself inside a patient's skin and thinking, how does this patient actually feel about what is the real problem?
Do you ever regret that statement?
Saying it at all. I think it made people, a lot of people from all over the world. I had nearly 9,000 letters and emails on that occasion, and about 80% were supportive.
You've said that Charles Kennedy, your leader at the time, was under pressure from external sources. What did you mean by that?
He telephoned me and said that I must apologise, and I said, apologise for what? I was just expressing a feeling. And how can you actually apologise? How can you withdraw words that you've spoken? That is a nonsense, and I refused to do that. And so he said, well, then I'm going to have to remove you from the front bench. And I just said, well, do whatever you have to do. He was under pressure from the Israel lobby, which in later years I discovered was very, very active in all political parties in this country. And as we all know, it practically runs American foreign policy.
On what grounds do you make the assertion that there is an Israel lobby controlling foreign policy? On what basis do you say that?
No, I wouldn't say it was foreign policy here, but I think it has a huge influence on the thinking of politicians, even in this country. If you've read the book in America by Professors Walton Mearsheimer called The Israel Lobby, and you translate it into a minor form is happening in Britain, every political party in this country, the three major political parties, have a big organisation called Friends of Israel, which are affiliated to them. There have been television documentary programmes made in this country about the influence those groups have on individual politicians and the party as a whole.